funny thing, but when you have a fishing channel dedicated to old school fishing equipment, folks tend to think you might be an expert in old school fishing equipment. Truth is, for a lot of the material covered on the Retro Bassin channel, I've got to do just as much research as anybody else because I am certainly not an expert at everything. I kind of like what I like, and for the rest of it, I kind of fake it until I make it. That doesn't stop Bassin buds from around the country and, quite frankly, around the world from sending me photographs and questions about old school lures that they want help getting identified. Well, today on Retro Bassin, we are going to dig back into the old treasure chest of some different submissions from Bassin buds, both on Facebook and Instagram. By the way, if you guys do have a lure or a piece of antique tackle that you want help getting identified, hit me up either on Instagram Messenger or secondarily Facebook. Truth be told, I'm not as good on Facebook just because I kind of get a lot of extra stuff there. But either way, I will drop links to both of those down below in the comment section. Now let's go ahead and see if some Bassin buds can stump Retro.
Retro Bassin, kicking some ass and wearing rayon jackets. Thinking about Bill Dance, watching these fish prance through my Ray-Ban glasses. Ain't nothing better than 40-year-old lures coming off of Zepco 33. Out on the bass boat, making beer cans float, doing some trespassing. Fishing it old school, this old stuff rules. Welcome to Retro Bassin.
All right, well, the first submission comes to us from Jimmy D, who sent a couple of pictures from his personal collection of antique saltwater tackle. And in it, he's got a couple of great Adam lures. I had fished with Adam poppers for years, not so much a traditional Adam plug, but I had to do a little bit of recon to figure out the history of this unique bait. I did find a great article on the Water written by a John Silva talking about the history of Adam lures. I'll drop a link to that down below, but it is a pretty fascinating tale. Well, apparently in the fall of 1994, on the banks of the Cape Cod Canal, a New Englander and avid angler by the name of Bob Pond was watching somebody else absolutely slay the striped bass. The other angler was kind of secretive about what he was using, and Bob could not quite figure out the lure in question. Fast forward a few weeks later, and Bob was walking down that same stretch of bank, and what did he find lying there, rather beat up? Well, it was none other than a creek chub. Well, that immediately got Bob Pond thinking about it. He went home and started to craft his own version of that bait. He ended up crafting his own creation out of wooden curtain rods, and he named it the Striper Adam, after the recently launched atom bombs that won World War II. Well, Jimmy D sent a couple photos of some different atom baits. Now, these do look like the plastic versions, but it's really unique. This is definitely a well-known bait up in the Northeast, maybe not so much in other parts of the country, but I have thrown this bait once or twice for stripers. What's interesting about the photos that Jimmy sent is you see the same bait sort of in two different configurations. One with a diving lip on sort of the bigger end, and then the other, which is called the Adam Squid, is flipped over and the bottlenose actually has the line tie. So it's kind of a unique thing that they did is they kind of took one bait and made two baits out of it. I do have actually old school floating Adam in my personal collection. I've got a few of these I haven't opened and a few of these that I have. This one is made of more of a solid resin material. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So this looks like a 2-ounce Adam right here. And this is a very similar version, I think, to the one that Bob Pond created somewhere around 1945. On the back, it's got a little description of the Adam lure here. And this is the Adam swimming plug. Now, I'm actually more familiar with the popping plug, and I'll show you one of those, but the swimming plug does have a little description, and we will read that. All right, it says, when retrieved at the proper depth, the swimming type action of the Adam plugs imitate a crippled minnow. Doesn't everything. floundering on or near the surface. Experiment with different speeds. The right one will be obvious when you see it. A crippled fluttering twitch, a sort of slow motion that stripers can't resist. And the same goes for the Adam teaser, and that might be either the reverse bait or the popper. The depth at which Adam plugs work is easily regulated by bending the eye of the plug down. A turn up will make the bait work deeper. A turn down brings it more toward the top. No need to bend the metal plate of the Adam swimmers. So that is a pretty industrial strength 2-ounce bait right there. I mean, that could catch a muskie for sure, and that is definitely a honey of a striped bass bait. Now, I will show you a Adam popper, and this is a bait I'm a little bit more familiar with from my time fishing on the tidal tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay. So this is probably, my guess, is a 2-ounce Adam popper. This almost looks like Cotton Cordell had a bait called the Near Nothing, a real small version. It's a little bit bigger. It's got sort of a popper nose to it. I would say it tends to spit water more so. In fact, if you get this thing really tuned in, it can spit, I feel like 5 or 6 feet of water. It does have a couple of industrial strength hooks. I think it's got a through wire here that goes from the front to the back. And then that goes through a swivel in the middle. And that will hold the middle treble hook. So this thing, no matter what you catch, nobody is pulling the hooks out on this. Now, one of the really cool things about the Adam popper to me is this resin material. This bait neither sinks quickly nor floats. A lot of times it kind of has just a slow, almost dead fall to it. Really quite easy to work on the surface, but if you do want to get it down a little bit, you pause it, it will sort of sink subsurface. A great bait. Honestly, if I probably put some more largemouth appropriate hooks, you could catch a largemouth on this, I have no doubt. Well, Jimmy, thanks for sending those photos of the Adam lures. You definitely inspired me to do a little bit of research on that unique bait. All right, the next is a couple of photos that come to us from Ted at Off the Hook Charters. Ted is a pretty frequent contributor to the comment section of the Retro Bassin channel, and he sent me some photos of some antique flatfishes that he has in his collection. Well, in 1934, Charles Heelan, or Helen, maybe somebody can let me know the proper pronunciation of that, but either way, he applied for a patent and began marketing his handmade wooden flatfish. And he sold 400 of them in his first year. I do have a few flatfishes. It is not a bait that I fish too often, but here is one that I've got. And this is a unique bait. I think this is the fly rod version of that bait. So we'll go ahead and pop this thing open. By the way, you gotta love the old school packaging that comes in this nice cardboard and plastic removable, thus savable container. So here is a flatfish. We'll get him out. And also, like many lures at the time, it came with some pretty handy dandy instructions. Doesn't really tell you fishing tips so much as how to tune the flatfish. All right, so here is the flatfish. It actually does say F7 on the side, and this is, believe it or not, the fly rod version, but this would be a pretty substantial offering to throw on a fly rod. It is a really cool unique crankbait where the lip is built into the body itself, and of course it is more flat in nature. Instead of a line tie or a standard snap, it actually comes with this sort of unique twisted wire right there. And on this particular model, it comes with, look at that, a little harness with 2 miniature treble hooks. That is pretty interesting. So some of the larger flatfish that I have do have this same hook configuration, and that is a pretty cool looking little bait. So honestly, this kind of inspired me. I'm gonna get this thing on the water. I've got some larger, more bass appropriate size to this thing. And more than anything, I kind of want to get some underwater footage of the flatfish to see how it performs just diving just below the surface. Something else I do have in my collection related to the flatfish is this, a pretty cool tackle guide of the Helen Tackle Company from sometime in the 1960s. What's interesting about this, and by the way, I probably could be talked into doing a flip through episode of this catalog if you guys are so interested, but it's got the Flatfish here, and then it's got two other designs that I'm not as familiar with. And on the back, it's got a pretty good listing of all the different ones. But apparently, in addition to the Flatfish, which is really the only bait that I know from that company, they've also got this one called the Swimmer Spoon, which looks like an upside down flatfish. I only imagine it must be made from a different material. I have to see if I can get my hands on one of those and maybe do a side-by-side of the Flatfish and the Swimmer Spoon. And then last is this neat little topwater called the Fish Cake. What a great name. What's kind of cool about all these baits is notice they've all got that double harness for the treble hooks. For whatever reason, they decided that this was going to be the way that you were going to get the most effective hook sets with this bait. I don't see too many standing up to the test of time today, so you got to wonder if maybe that was not as effective as Charles Helen thought. But that is a pretty cool catalog of the Flatfish, and it really shows you just how many different sizes they had. Look at that. They've got everything from the baby all the way up to the muskie. Well, definitely drop me a note. Let me know if you want to see more of this honey of a catalog. In the meantime, Ted, thank you for sharing those photos. All right, next I've got a couple of photos sent to me from Chad G of a lure that he found in his grandfather's tackle box. From the looks of it, these are worms made from leather. Clearly, this is some sort of homemade deal, and I've never seen anything like this before in a worm form. Really, really intriguing, and you gotta wonder how those things would fish. I'll talk a little bit about my theories about leather lures, but I was kind of thinking, okay, what do I have, or what could I show on camera that is sort of a leather equivalent? And unsurprisingly, there are not many, but I do have two. The first, if I can get it off here without breaking this lure, is this, a creek chub fintail shiner. This is probably one of the most rare baits in my collection. The actual bait that caught, by the way, this fish, which is a replica of George W. Perry's catch, was caught on this, the creek chub fintail shiner. And while this is a wooden bait, it actually does come with 4 leather fins. It's got a fin on the back, which is leather, a fin on the top, and a fin on the side. Now, I have not had the courage or the stupidity to throw this thing, so I really can't tell you how this thing would fish in the water, but I imagine this leather probably came alive pretty well. And clearly, I don't know how hard this particular bait was fished, but it did stand up the test of time. All 4 leather appendages are intact on this bait. Well, the next bait I actually would fish with, and that is this, a dry rind jig from Fred Arbogast. This is a pretty standard size jig, probably a 1/4 ounce jig right there. But notice that crawfish is not made from plastic or skirted material. No. That is pretty much leather. It's got a couple of nice claws on it as well. A little bit of fur on the bottom. And then of course the 2 little antennae right there. Now back to those leather worms in Grandpa's tackle box. Notice that both the fintail shiner and this jig don't actually have a hook piercing through the leather. While leather might swim great underwater, you can only imagine that it is not great for piercing or Texas rigging. Makes sense, right? So my big question for those photos that Chad sent were, how the heck would you rig that thing? Maybe you would have to do some sort of harness, maybe you would sort of nose hook it, but yeah, there's no way to Texas rig a worm like that. That being said, if I had a worm in my possession, I would certainly try to figure out a way to fish it. All right, the last submission for this Stump Retro episode is not actually a photo, but a question. And this one comes to us from Tony V. He says, hello, I heard you on the Cut and Tie podcast, and I thought I'd ask you about a lure from my childhood that I've been unable to ID. I used the lure in the late 90s and could buy it at Walmart. Well, there's our first clue. It was a small white hollow-bodied mouse, and it had yellow eyes. Now here's where this gets interesting. He says that the tail portion of the bait is what made it such a great lure. Instead of a traditional tail or bundle of stringy plastic on the back, it had what I would describe as a black comb. Interesting. You guys figured it out yet? Now, all I can find are mice with thick plastic strings or a realistic mouse tail, and they simply do not sit nicely in the weeds. I've researched and I've been unable to ID it. I thought that if anyone would know, it would be you. Well, Tony, you are in luck. And yeah, I have been stumped before, but this is one I actually knew. And I do have a spread of this lure in this catalog, which is my 1990 Bass Pro Shops Master Catalog. I had to go through a few catalogs because I wasn't sure what year this bait was available. And it's funny, I feel like we're not getting through an episode of Retro Bassin these days without mentioning the Man's Bait Company. Well, let's add one more. Look at this. Here it is, the Man's Rat. And yes, that is definitely a hollow-bodied frog mouse, if you will. And look at that black comb tail. Let me see what it says about this bad boy. What does a bass say when it chomps down on one of these rats? I don't know. What does it say? This is the rat. The rat is the ultimate topwater bait for fishing across the thickest summer cover. It's really all it says. So that's interesting. So it really doesn't say too much. However, I can imagine that this was going to keep this thing sort of buoyed up a little bit better in the weeds. And honestly, most rats, or actually frogs, if you think about it, everything past the hook, there's not much there to keep it up. And you probably could have a situation where you might get a little bit more snagged. This thing is going to sit, I guarantee you, a lot higher in the water column. So Tony, now that you know what that bait is, get you on over to eBay and grab you some, because I've got a feeling there's going to be a few keyword searches for that Man's Rat after we drop this episode. By the way, guys, thanks for tuning in. And if you want to submit your own photo or simply a question for a future episode of Stump Retro, hit me up on either the Instagram or the Facebook. In the meantime, if you guys are looking for some more old school content, well, you can click right here. Otherwise, I'll see you right back here. Until then, keep that carpet side up and definitely fish it old school.
Fishing it old school, this old stuff rules. Welcome to Retro Bassin.